His fingers had already fallen off. King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem could barely grip his sword. Leprosy was consuming him alive at 21 years old. The disease had taken his hands, his face, his ability to walk without assistance. Physicians gave him months, perhaps weeks. Yet on this scorching morning, June 11, 1182, at precisely 6:47 a.m., this dying monarch made a decision that defied every principle of medieval warfare. He would lead 750 knights out of the safety of Belvoir Castle and march directly toward an army that stretched to the horizon. 30,000 of Islam's finest warriors, the legendary Saladin commanding them. When Saladin's forward scouts reported the Crusader numbers, laughter rippled through the Muslim command tents. 750 knights against 30,000? This wasn't a battle. This was a gift from Allah, the complete annihilation of Christian military power in the Holy Land, delivered on a silver platter. But by 5:23 p.m. that same day, 2,000 Muslim warriors would lie dead in the Jordan Valley. The tiny Crusader force would remain intact. They had achieved what every military manual of the era declared impossible. 3 questions have consumed historians for 8 centuries. How did a force so vastly outnumbered not merely survive, but triumph? What revolutionary formation made Crusader infantry suddenly invincible against the feared Turkish cavalry? And why did winning this miraculous victory actually accelerate the Kingdom of Jerusalem's total destruction? If you're still here with me, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us here on Narrate History Arena. To understand this impossible victory, we must examine the catalyst. The year 1180 had brought exhausted peace to the Levant. A 2-year truce between the Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem and Saladin's expanding Ayyubid Empire gave both sides precious time to recover from decades of bloodshed. Baldwin IV ruled from Jerusalem despite his ravaging disease. At 19, he had already proven himself a brilliant tactician at the Battle of Montgizar, where he routed Saladin's forces with similar audacity. But his body was failing faster than his kingdom could stabilize. Facing him stood Saladin, the Kurdish general who had united Syria and Egypt under Islamic rule for the first time in generations. Where previous Muslim leaders squabbled among themselves, Saladin brought unity, discipline, and singular purpose, the reconquest of Jerusalem. But here's what the official chronicles deliberately obscure. The catalyst for war wasn't religious fervor. It was pure, undiluted greed. Reynald de Chatillon controlled the fortress of Kerak, positioned directly above the vital trade routes connecting Damascus to Egypt and Mecca. Despite the truce, despite Baldwin's explicit orders, Reynald couldn't resist the glittering caravans passing beneath his walls. In late November 1181, Reynald attacked a massive merchant convoy traveling from Damascus toward Mecca. The plunder was staggering: 200,000 gold dinars in goods, hundreds of prisoners, exotic spices and silks. Among those captured was a woman traveling under Saladin's personal protection. Some chroniclers claim she was Saladin's sister, others say a cousin. The identity matters less than the insult. When Saladin demanded compensation and the immediate return of all captives, Reynald reportedly laughed. "Let your Muhammad come and save them." The truce died with those words. Saladin declared jihad, summoning warriors from every corner of his empire. By May 1182, an army of 30,000 had assembled at Damascus: regular cavalry, mounted archers, professional Mamluks, and volunteer fighters seeking paradise through holy war. The Kingdom of Jerusalem faced geometric annihilation. Baldwin could muster approximately 1,200 knights from his entire realm. Most of these defended isolated castles scattered across territory stretching from modern Lebanon to the Gulf of Aqaba. The kingdom's defensive strength lay in these fortresses, but that strength was also its fatal weakness. Defending everywhere meant being strong nowhere. At 3:15 a.m. on June 10, 1182, Baldwin convened his war council at Belvoir Castle. The fortress commanded the Jordan Valley from a limestone cliff rising 500 feet above the surrounding plains. Its position was superb for defense, but defense wasn't what Baldwin had in mind. He proposed something that made his commanders physically recoil: strip the garrisons, leave skeleton crews in every castle across the kingdom, concentrate every available fighting man into one mobile field army. Raymond III of Tripoli, the kingdom's most experienced military commander, objected violently. "You're asking us to abandon the walls that keep us alive. If we lose in the field, there will be nothing left. Better to lose villages than the kingdom." Baldwin's response reveals the psychological core of his leadership. If we hide behind walls, Saladin will burn every village, every farm, every source of food and tax revenue we possess. In 3 months we will starve. The walls will become our tombs. This was Baldwin's decision point, the moment that defined his legacy. He chose the probability of death in battle over the certainty of death by slow strangulation. Saladin's host emerged from Damascus on June 8th. To understand what Baldwin faced, you must visualize 30,000 men. If they marched in column, the army stretched for 15 miles. Their daily food consumption equaled that of a small city. The dust cloud from their movement could be spotted from 20 miles distant. The corps consisted of 12,000 mounted archers, Turks and Kurds who could loose arrows at full gallop with devastating accuracy. These warriors had perfected the Parthian shot, firing backward while retreating, turning flight into attack. Behind them came 8,000 regular cavalry armed with lances and curved swords. The remaining 10,000 included infantry, siege engineers, and irregular volunteers. At maximum engagement, these archers could unleash 30,000 arrows every 60 seconds. Each mounted archer carried 2 composite bows and 60 arrows. The logistics alone represented one of medieval history's greatest military achievements. Against this overwhelming force, Baldwin assembled his pitiful response. 750 knights, each representing years of training, wearing 80 pounds of chainmail and plate armor that cost as much as a prosperous village. 4,000 infantry scraped from every garrison, crossbowmen and spearmen hardened by constant frontier warfare. Baldwin himself could barely sit upright. Witnesses at Belvoir described how attendants had to physically lift him onto his horse. His hands, wrapped in silk to conceal their decay, couldn't grip reins. An aide held the bridle, while Baldwin directed from the saddle through whispered commands. Yet his tactical mind remained sharper than Damascus steel. As Saladin's forces crossed into the Jordan Valley on June 10th, they began systematic destruction. Muslim raiders swept through Christian villages, burning homes, slaughtering livestock, carrying off everything of value. From Belvoir's walls, the Crusaders watched smoke pillars rise across the valley. 60 villages reduced to charred ruins in 72 hours. Women and children fled toward the castle, choking the roads. Saladin was teaching a lesson in economic warfare. Each burning farm meant lost tax revenue, fewer future recruits, diminished supplies. He wasn't trying to defeat the Crusaders in battle. He was bleeding them dry. But in focusing on destruction, Saladin made a critical miscalculation. He gave Baldwin time. During those 3 days, while smoke darkened the sky, Baldwin's forces practiced something unprecedented, a formation that would change medieval warfare. The Iron Hedgehog, appearing in Latin chronicles as Ericius Ferocious, represented a complete reimagining of combined arms tactics. Standard Crusader doctrine placed knights at the front, infantry behind. Knights charged, infantry followed. The problem was speed. Knights on horseback moved 3 times faster than men on foot. Charges inevitably separated the two forces, allowing Turkish cavalry to isolate and destroy them piecemeal. Baldwin reversed everything. Infantry formed the outer shell, a moving wall of 14-foot pikes bristling outward like a hedgehog's spines. Crossbowmen filled gaps between spearmen. Knights remained inside this protective shell, held in reserve like a coiled spring. The formation could absorb cavalry charges. It could advance under arrow fire. And at the critical moment, sections of the pike wall could open, allowing knights to countercharge through designated gaps before sealing shut again. It was a fortress that could walk. At 6:47 a.m., the gates opened. Saladin's scouts couldn't process what they were seeing. Instead of knights charging ahead with infantry struggling behind, the entire Crusader force moved as one organism, a bristling diamond of steel crawling across the valley floor. The first test came at 7:23 a.m. 12,000 mounted archers unleashed their opening volleys. The sky literally darkened with shafts. The Crusader formation raised shields in disciplined unison, creating an overlapping shell. Arrows that could pierce mail at 50 yards lost killing power. At the 200-yard range, Turkish archers preferred. Shafts thudded into wood and leather, turning shields into porcupines, but the men beneath kept walking. At 8:15 a.m., Emir Muzaffar al-Din ordered the first cavalry probe. 500 Mamluk heavy cavalry, the finest horsemen in Islam, thundered toward the Crusader line at full gallop. The physics that followed defied expectation. The Mamluk charge hit the pike wall with the force of an avalanche. Horses screamed. Pikes shattered. The Crusader line bent backward like a drawn bow, but it did not break. As the cavalry pulled back to regroup, crossbow bolts erupted from the formation. At 50 yards, a crossbow bolt could punch through mail armor like parchment. In 30 seconds, 80 elite Mamluks lay dead or dying in the dust. At 9:47 a.m., Baldwin collapsed. The disease that was consuming his body chose this moment to strike. Witnesses reported him sliding from his saddle, caught by his bodyguard before hitting the rocky ground. His vision blurred. His breath came in shallow gasps. Yet even from a litter carried by 4 men, the Leper King continued directing the battle. "Hold formation," he whispered to his aide, who screamed the orders to the line. "Let them come to us." The pattern repeated throughout the morning. Muslim cavalry charges, the line bending but never breaking. Devastating crossbow volleys as attackers withdrew. Turkish commanders grew increasingly frustrated. At 11:32 a.m., they attempted their specialty, the feigned retreat. 500 cavalry charged, made minimal contact, then fled in apparent panic. The tactic had destroyed countless crusader armies. Young knights, blood-hot with battle fury, would chase fleeing enemies, only to be surrounded and slaughtered when the Turks wheeled around. Not a single crusader knight broke formation. The Iron Hedgehog proved immune to every standard approach. Saladin, watching from a command position on a nearby ridge, began recalculating. At 12:15 p.m., Baldwin ordered something unprecedented. The entire formation began advancing, not charging, advancing. Step by synchronized step, the Iron Hedgehog rolled forward across the plain. The rhythmic crash of armored feet, the forest of pikes catching midday sun. Muslim cavalry, trained for mobility and fluid combat, faced a walking fortress of steel and human determination. Saladin responded with overwhelming force. At 1:03 p.m., he committed 8,000 cavalry in the largest single charge of the campaign. The ground shook so violently that men inside Belvoir Castle later swore the walls trembled. The Crusader line disappeared in a maelstrom of horses, dust, and screaming metal. But the Iron Hedgehog didn't break, it flexed. As cavalry crashed into one section, that portion buckled backward, while adjacent sections swung inward like closing doors. Attacking horsemen found themselves funneled into kill zones, receiving crossbow fire from 3 directions simultaneously. A Templar knight later wrote, "The Saracens fell like wheat before the scythe. Their magnificent cavalry died pressed against our pikes, unable to advance or retreat." By 2:30 p.m., Saladin had lost 2,000 men. The Crusaders had lost 180. At 3:47 p.m., Saladin made the decision that marked him as history's greatest Islamic general. His army still outnumbered the Crusaders by overwhelming margins. His emirs urged continued assault, but Saladin calculated the exchange rate and saw catastrophe. Signaled the withdrawal. The retreat was masterful, controlled, disciplined, preserving face while preserving force. Muslim cavalry pulled back in stages. Infantry formed rear guard. Baldwin ordered his exhausted men to hold position. No pursuit. The Crusaders watched their enemies withdraw, too tired to cheer. The immediate toll was staggering. 2,000 Muslim dead, 180 Crusader casualties. By medieval standards, the ratio was impossible, the kind of numbers that appear only in exaggerated chronicles written decades later. But this was real. That night, as Crusaders prayed in exhausted gratitude, Saladin reviewed his own lessons. The 60 villages burned before the battle represented the kingdom's tax base for the coming year. No crops meant no revenue. No revenue meant no money for soldiers, repairs, or supplies. Baldwin had won the battle, but Saladin had already won the economic war. The strategic trap was now clear. Saladin didn't need to defeat the Iron Hedgehog. He needed to starve it. The Kingdom of Jerusalem could not maintain concentrated field armies indefinitely. Concentration meant stripped garrisons, vulnerable territories, and economic hemorrhaging. Baldwin had proven Crusader forces could win against overwhelming odds, but only by sacrificing everything else. 5 years later, Saladin applied every lesson from Belvoir. At the Horns of Hattin in July 1187, he forced the Crusader army away from water sources, exhausted them with constant harassment, and struck when discipline finally cracked. The kingdom that seemed invincible at Belvoir collapsed in a single afternoon. Baldwin IV died in March 1185, aged 24. His body finally surrendered to the disease that had stalked him since childhood. He never knew that his greatest triumph had taught his enemy exactly how to destroy everything he loved. The Iron Hedgehog formation, one of medieval history's most brilliant tactical innovations, died with the kingdom. It required trained, disciplined troops that the Crusader states could never again maintain. Saladin took Jerusalem in October 1187. He was notably merciful to the inhabitants, perhaps remembering the young king who had defied him so magnificently 5 years earlier. The age of chivalric warfare ended in the Jordan Valley. In its place rose a crueler arithmetic, economics over heroics, attrition over glory, strategic patience over tactical brilliance. Saladin learned that to defeat the Iron Hedgehog, you don't attack it, you starve it.